On an island at the edge of the world, a few years shy of the 20th century, the private and his partner landed their boat. Emerging from a thick fog, they struck the coast in a place of sheer cliffs. The current was deadly, but they made it into a small cove without capsizing. Though they were in their mid-20s, they acted like boys, tense and laughing by turns, moving quickly, hauling their craft into the rocks out of reach of the surf, retrieving provisions and firearms. The private's wet hair hung in black hooks around his thin face. He wore a coat of maroon felt. Its cuffs were frayed and an arm was tatted where the chevron had been removed, but the cloth still had its color, and as he loaded his packboard, the sun flashed on its golden piping. The two tramped the shoreline and mountains heading north. It was March and the peaks were still covered with snow. The private led the way. It wasn't a map or notes he consulted. He was guided by voices. There were ghosts in the wind, whispers from the snow or the invisible meltwater flowing beneath. It was the same presence that spoke through his dreams. He believed in the voices, and through some harmony of their natures, his partner believed in him. On the morning of the third day, the two men crossed an icy ridge and came upon a narrow valley. The slopes of the valley were white, and the small river that wound through it was frozen. In places, rock was visible, a black metamorphic. Where the river met the coast, it had broken through the cliffs, forming a natural harbor. The private scanned the harbor. As he descended into the valley, a breeze reached him. He could taste salt from the sea, and in the wind's murmur he heard the echo of a promise. The spruce on either side were wind-sheared with crowns like dark clouds, and the snow beneath his boots was littered with needles, as if some testament had been recorded there in a language unknown to man. He mumbled about what the text meant, and his partner mumbled back. Their heavy packs rattled and creaked as they moved. The head of the valley came into view. Between the sloping confines of the river, a trapezoidal wall appeared, black and thinly forested, grooved vertically, as if it had been clawed by an angry hand. The private straddled a fallen tree, pushing aside the upstart saplings rooted on its trunk. His partner followed. They approached the river's bank. In places the ice had melted, and through the soggy mulch, yellow spikes of swamp cabbage rose, each at the center of a straw-colored star. The private paused beside the frozen floe and raised his arm, holding his rifle barrel up. As he stepped forward, he brought the rifle down, cracking its stock onto the river ice. The surface was solid and held his weight, but as the rifle descended, the tip of a branch cocked the hammer, and when the butt struck, a shot rang out. The men jumped. A jay flew out of a pool and went rasping through the birch. The private listened to the echoes, his eyes on the willow branch, watching its crystal feathers tremble. The two men crossed the river. They were mounting the far bank when they caught sight of a bear on the trapezoidal wall, shifting against the snow that covered its crest. The shot had awakened him. He was stumbling out of his den. The bear's back was icy. It flashed in the sun like the carapace of a beetle, an amulet worked in gold for a pharaoh's tomb. When the private saw the bear, he knew. The bear crossed the ridge where it was steepest, cutting through the winter pack. A groan filled the valley. As the two men watched, the slopes below the bear's track line came away in a thick mass. Snow, soil, and trees all churning together, and the mountain's top was dragged along. The roar mounted and the valley rumbled as the slide descended. The bear and the ridge vanished in a cloud of rock and ice dust. They shrugged off their packs, eyes fixed on the sight. The clouds shredded around the crest. Amid the drifting veils, a giant seam of quartz appeared, a thick white cord stretching diagonally. Rays played over it, searching as the veils shifted. The private saw the quartz come alive. It was turning and twisting, and the bright beams piercing its crystal found winking stars and golden flames. A translucent cord connecting the poor to something of worth, something unborn to something timeless, someone condemned to someone divine. The private's partner saw the glittering cord. The private saw the presence that had summoned him. As he watched, she froze back into the rock. The private looked at his partner. Then without a word, they were racing toward the bank, recrossing the river, beating through the straw and the whipping scrub, making toward the mountain and its naked quartz. The private was in front. A prospector's pick bobbed on his thigh, its haft through his belt. His strides jarred the earth, turning seep gurgles to birdsong and gravel to grasshoppers. Thrushes called, heralding his arrival. The whistling of wrens filtered down from the trees. It was late that night, and the two men were camped by the river. Smoke coiled up from a dying fire. They were in their tent, and a lone candle lit the canvas from within. At the head of the valley, the giant white cord glimmered beneath a full moon, while on the slopes far below, the burden it had shed continued to settle. A web of splintered trunks heaved and a boulder rolled aside. From beneath the debris, the bear's arm appeared, shoving and clawing, prying the last wooden bars of his prison apart. He crawled out of the hole and lay licking his wounds. Then he drew a few breaths and tried his legs. He wobbled and growled, then he crossed the rubble, shaking his head and chomping his jaws. His confinement had ended, but his distemper remained. He lumbered toward the river, icy crust stuck to his back, swiping alders aside, snorting steam into the air as if to rid his nostrils of a noxious odor. The bear didn't see the tent. His attention was on the bluff at the mouth of the valley. Then the prospector's light flickered. The bear shook with surprise, stopping in his tracks. A cool breeze carried the smoke and the man's scent into his nostrils. He fixed on the tent, then he was loping toward it, crashing through birch and willow, ripping up armfuls as he went.